Thank you for joining us for the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association virtual conference presentations.
Hello, everyone. This is the UPA virtual conference again, and we're very happy to have everyone with you. You can learn more about UPA at www.uppaa.org. Now, we're based in the Upper Peninsula, but our members come from all over the Midwest, and we even have them in as far apart as New Mexico and beyond. This evening, though, we have Aimée Bissonette, who is a lawyer, teacher, and writer from Minneapolis, Minnesota. She has published books for both children's and educational markets. In her legal practice, Aimée, recently retired, has worked with numerous authors and illustrators, advising them on all aspects of trade and indie publishing. Aimée has presented as a guest lecturer for the Highlights Foundation at its Self or Indie Publishing Workshop. Look for her article, Dissecting the Self-Publishing Contract in Writer's Digest 2015 Guide to Self-Publishing. Welcome, Aimée. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Victor. And thank you, the rest of you guys, for showing up tonight, and greetings to whomever may be watching this in the future on video, I guess, streaming. I've been really looking forward to talking with you guys about this topic because I love children's books. I particularly love picture books. And I'm assuming that that's why you're here as well, that you are probably interested in learning about writing them if you are not already writing them. And then, of course, there are, the things that come to pass that are very unique to publishing children's books, because it's quite different from publishing a novel or even a middle grade novel or a work that is geared for older kids. So what I want you to know, and this first slide is actually showing you this, in preparing to talk with you guys, I talked to a number of people that I know who have successfully published illustrated children's works via self-publishing, indie publishing, because I wanted this to not just be my point of view, but to give you some thoughts from other people. So as we tick through the slides, you're going to see there'll be slides like this one that have comments. We aren't going to read the comments. I'm not going to read them to you verbatim, but I am going to point out some things that are brought up by these different people who participated in sort of my question and answer session when I was trying to ask the pros some questions about their experiences. So Victor, what I'm hoping is that these slides will be available after the presentation to people as well. So if they want to go back and look more deeply at some of these comments, that they'll be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, so these first few groups of comments are really the question that I threw out was there were three things. I asked people what surprised them about their indie publishing experience, what was most challenging, and what advice would they give to people who wanted to indie publish their own illustrated children's works. Now, these first two comments, and I'll provide you with the names of these folks at the end, particularly if you want to touch base with any of them or go to their websites. But on these first two comments, DP is Darcy Pattison, and she actually has her own children's press. She published for years through regular trade publishing, and then decided, you know what? I know what I'm doing. I can do it well. I want to do it on my own. I want to call my own shots. I want to make my own money. And as a result, she has published scores of books, and they're really well done. They're Junior Library Guild selections. They're state award winners. She's just a machine. So Darcy's tip, of course, is to say, this is a business. Treat it like a business, and realize that if you're in it for the long haul, that you need to give yourself at least 3 years of getting down, rolling up your sleeves and working at this before you can judge whether you're a success or not. By contrast, the Paul Hoffman's comment right below it, Paul had one book idea, a book he had worked on, a book he loved, and his grandkids thought it was hysterical. And so he just had that one book and thought, I want to publish this. I want to get it out into the hands of kids. And Paul, basically said he was sort of had analysis paralysis, because he started looking at all the different sites on how to indie publish, and he just was overwhelmed. So I guess what you would take away from these two, and Victor, go ahead to the next slide, as well as the comments on the next slide, are this is a different experience for everybody, and it really depends on what your goal is, all right? Lloyd Westcoat points out there are a lot of moving parts, and that you need to think not only about your book and getting it published, but then distribution. And you guys know Lloyd, you know she's a bookseller, so she's always thinking in terms of distribution. But that point was echoed by everybody who did their own self-publishing experience with kids' books is, man, distribution is hard, and you just really don't want to be, have a trunk full of books that you can't unload. Sticking to a budget, huge, huge point that was emphasized. Paul, that's Paul's comment here, but emphasized by everybody across the board as well, that there are a lot of kind of enticing things, that little bells and whistles that you can add to your publishing experience. But boy, upfront, set a budget, stick to it. And also connect with other children's authors. So of all the folks who are attending today, how many of you have already written stories for children?
Well,
so,
I've
hands.
several.
Okay, and how many of you have not just written for children, but written for the youngest readers, picture books? Okay, how many of you have self-published an illustrated work for children? Deb, you have, okay. And I'm gonna scroll down and see who else. All right, Deb, are you the lone one?
I don't know. I can only see about the first 5 people that are here.
Yeah, if you go to the bottom, there's a little divot and you can hit that and you can see the other folks that are here, but I'm assuming that that's the case because I didn't see any other hands up.
Well, Gretchen is pretty accomplished.
And I'm sorry, who did you say, Vic?
Gretchen is pretty accomplished.
And Gretchen, have you published illustrated works for children?
Yes, I have the Valley Cat series of children's chapter books that are beautifully illustrated.
Excellent, good. All right, so you guys, you will also join the pros, and please, I will stop at different junctures and ask questions, and please share your experiences, okay? Because as I said, these are some folks that I knew and I talked to, but the more people you talk to who have gone through this, the smarter you'll be about it. All right, so the next slide, please, Victor. Again, just, one of this first comment is by an illustrator, and although he probably knows a lot more about design and illustration, and so the production pieces were not difficult for him, he echoes here that the hardest part for him was to get the book published and out there, get it distributed. And hats off to Nick for saying this. He says, it's hard to break through the noise. There's a lot of competition. He's absolutely right about that. But as he points out, this is also really an issue for traditional publishing too. Just because you're indie publishing doesn't mean that you are the only ones with an issue getting your book noticed and getting it distributed and getting the sales that you want. That's just the reality, because the children's market is really saturated, particularly for picture books, and there's a lot of competition. All right, the next slide, please, Victor. At the bottom of the slide, there's an image, and it's a cover of Celeste Tilson's book, Ms. McNair's Fantastic Hair. And we'll be talking about this one in a few minutes. But I love this cover. Celeste's comment is really the kind of the wrap-up introductory comment that, again, so many people said is find out, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Do you want to have 100 copies printed to give to friends? That's one way of approaching this. Do you really want to get it out there on multiple platforms as an ebook? Do you want to do print on demand, or do you want to actually have a small print run that you do with an independent printer? And so again, plan, have a budget, know that it's going to take time. And you know, the last piece there that Celeste says, true whether it's indie publishing or trade publishing for kids. If you're trying to make enough money to retire, she says you'll make different decisions. You might actually just choose not to publish for kids, but we all know that, right?
All right.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I loved the title of this presentation, and I had nothing to do with it. This must be Victor. We were talking before you guys joined. He's a title guy, and this is a perfect title. You know, he and I talked about topics that I would address, but this notion of crafting the self-published picture book, unique product, unique issues, is perfect. Because when you are working in a picture book format, you have to nail the craft. There are some very specific things about the picture book genre. But then if you're taking the additional steps to also self-publish that work, then you've got some production issues that don't come into play, again, if you are you know, self-publishing a novel. So some of the quick questions here, and we'll go through them in more detail. Who is my audience? Your picture book audience, this is always an interesting question because really it's a dual audience. You're writing stories for kids. Who is buying the book? Parents.
Grown-ups.
Grown-ups, parents, teachers,
Grandma.
grandparents, exactly, aunts, whomever. So, who is my audience is a good question. You've got to make this book appealing for your young readers, but you've also got to catch the eye and the dollars of the book buyers. Is my story idea fresh and unique? You know, this is the $10,000 question, right? For all of us, and really applies to any genre of writing. But in kids' books, it's got to be fresh. And what sold 20 years ago for an illustrated children's work probably wouldn't sell today. It keeps changing. And now this doesn't mean that you can't do an idea that's been done before. How many biographies do you think there are of Helen Keller? I know I have several different biographies of Harriet Tubman, and I love them because they're all illustrated so differently and they're all told so differently. So it's not that an idea cannot be repurposed, but it has to be fresh. Your telling has to be unique. Of those of you who have published, so Gretchen and Deb, did you hire illustrators?
Yes, I did.
And Gretchen, you already said that you did. Yep.
I did, yes, but I interviewed a lot of illustrators before I chose my final illustrator, who I'm very happy with.
Good for you. And that's music to my ears. And again, something that all of our pros said as well, that you've got to, you know, treat this like a business and really go out and look for the best and somebody who's a good fit. Now, I don't illustrate either. So none of the books that I have published have I illustrated, and that's a very good thing. But what I will show you when we get to the very last slide before we wrap up today is I have the covers of my different books on the slide. And I enjoy looking at the different covers because they are all so very different. The artistic approaches are so different. But that's something you've got to know up front as well. If you're self-publishing, you've got to find an illustrator if you don't do that on your own. The picture book genre, we'll talk about in a couple minutes, some of the sort of idiosyncrasies of that, and the rules of picture books and when to break them. So you've got all those sort of craft issues on one side, and then on the other side, you've got those questions like, why am I doing this myself? Why am I bypassing traditional publishing? And I would love to hear from you guys at this point and have you tell me why this is appealing to you, the notion of self-publishing and illustrated work for kids.
Well, I talked with a lot of friends in SCBWI, and some of them I just had them answer, you know, if they would, basically, you know, how much are you making? And I found that when I looked at it and I figured it out, I could make just as much selling half as many books on my own as they were making in royalties. And I thought, yeah, and I'm kind of a control freak. I didn't want somebody else telling me how to do and turning my book into something that I didn't feel like it was mine anymore. And I heard some of those stories from traditionally published friends as well.
Okay, all right. Gretchen, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I just ditto. I mean, this was it was an act, a labor of love, and I wanted it to be mine and a gift to the world from me, and I wanted complete control over it.
Good. These are good reasons, and these are the same kinds of things that you would hear from Darcy Pattison and that you would hear from Catherine Otoshi, who is somebody, I'm going to show you her book in a few minutes. Both of them, just like the two of you, appreciated that if they did this and they did it well, that they certainly could make more money on a royalty standpoint, but more importantly, that they wanted to be in charge of their own projects. I have published with publishers in the traditional arena. I have not self-published yet. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to self-publish yet. But I will tell you that, you know, working with a team is fascinating and it's fun if they're a good team, but you do have to be a good advocate for yourself. And so those folks, Deb, who told you that they felt like they kind of lost control of their projects, you know, sometimes writers are too amenable to the direction of an editor. I mean, you can't fight every fight, just as you can't if you're self-publishing, but you pick your battles, and some things you stand firm on. And if you don't, I think you might end up disappointed. You're right. So know why you're doing this, have a plan, know who you need on your team. You know, your team is going to be as big as you want it to be, which of course might equate to as expensive as you can afford it to be. But at a minimum, you've got to have the illustrator that you work well with, a printer that knows what he or she is doing. And, you know, I would tell you, an editor, that you should be not just relying on a friend or family member to edit. Now, you might be members of a good writing group and have some very keen eyes among the people in your writing group, you know, but make sure that you've got somebody who's editing it from a developmental standpoint. Is the text strong? And then also, of course, copy editing, so that you don't spend a lot of money and end up with something where you've missed in proofing some error that's just going to make you want to hang your head. Know what your budget is, and then of course you got to figure out distribution. All right, Victor, next slide, please. Okay, a few of the idiosyncrasies of picture books. I already mentioned the competition. So there's a lot of competition, you need to know that. But interestingly, there seem to be these perennial stories that people come up with, and that's where the competition is steepest. First day of school books, holiday books, Halloween, Christmas, bedtime stories, wanting a pet. Now, I'm not saying that these can't be done well, or they can't be done uniquely or with a fresh point of view, but just know that if that's the kind of story that you've got in mind, it really does need to be unique. You have to position it differently, because there's a lot of other people who are like-minded with regard to topic. You cannot spend enough time in libraries and bookstores looking at children's books. You've got to see who else has used your idea or done something similar. Because I got to tell you, I don't think there's any unique idea. But how have they done it? And then what does their book look like? You can also do this kind of in reverse, not just look for books on the similar topic, but look for books that have a look and feel that you want to emulate. And so, you know, go to the library, and even in these COVID times, I don't know what your libraries are doing, but in Minneapolis, I can just, you know, electronically request and have books held for me and go pick them up. And, you know, if you ever looked at my library order list, it's always picture books, always scads of them, because it helps. You might read a picture book and say, oh, I like the tone, the narrative tone. There's something about the way this story is told that I really like. Or there's something about this one I really don't like. Know too that these issues of we need diverse books and own stories, these are very, very big in the kids publishing world right now. Don't step on toes. There's nothing that will get you more backlash more quickly than trying to write a book that is not your own story, to write outside of your own experience. There are people on, particularly on social media, that are rabid about this. Does that mean that occasionally you have to give up an idea for a story? I think you do. I like, for instance, several of my books are picture book biographies, and I came across the story of a woman who I would have loved to have written her story. She was one of the first Black female lawyers in the state of Minnesota, and she helped start the NAACP chapter in Minnesota. She was fascinating. She was working as a hairdresser and decided, I'm going to go to law school. I can't take this ill treatment anymore, all this inequity. That's not my story to write. Even though I am a lawyer, and I could argue that, she's a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, we're both women. I could list a number of reasons why I would be the right person to tell that story. I think it would backfire. So know that those are issues. Who in the group writes nonfiction besides Bill? Tyler, of course, yeah. All right, nonfiction, I'll tell you, if you want to get into children's writing right now, this is hot. This is a good place to get started, whether you want to do it with traditional presses or whether you're doing this on your own. And it's just for a couple reasons. Number one, there's just so much more you can do with nonfiction now because nonfiction books are sought after by parents and by grandparents, but also by teachers. Teachers need supplementary materials for their curriculum. And they also need, the whole core classroom notion. I think core has been replaced with something else now, but there still are particular skills that they have to make sure they are teaching, and particular topics that are making it onto kids' desks. And so nonfiction books can be a wonderful supplement. And there are a lot of very good nonfiction presses that are putting out some impressive work. So again, if that's kind of lights your lamp, and it is something I really enjoy doing, Bill, I think about your hockey books, and I had a teacher tell me the other day she really wants a good kids hockey series, a fictional series, but where hockey is the core. Now, I was mentioning nonfiction, which you write, and then I just said fiction in the next breath, but that's because she wants something that's realistic. Would it be narrative nonfiction, or maybe it could be straight nonfiction, but for kids? Something to consider once you're done with that Michigan State book, okay? All right, next slide, please. So, where's your focus got to be? If you want to indie publish, good. We've got some good reasons already stated for why you might want to do that. But you can't skimp on either side. We said there are two sides, two halves of this coin, right? There's the craft side and there's the production side. And you cannot skimp on either one. So first rule of thumb, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I know that. You guys all know this. The story has to be as good as it can be. You cannot move forward until that story is strong. Your text is strong. It's delivered the way it should be delivered. An editor or somebody with editorial skills has taken a good look at it for you. It's got to be tight. Children's picture books are usually about 500 words. Now, you may say, oh, piece of cake, 500 words, right? And a lot of people say this to me when I say, oh yeah, I write kids books. They're like, oh yeah, I've wanted to do that. I think I'm going to do one this weekend. They are short, there's no question, but they are, oh my goodness, it's actually part of why I love picture books, is because I view them more as a puzzle. 500, it's hard to get a good story in 500 words. And I love the editing, and I love the page turn, and I love this notion that I've got to make this as tight as it can be, and that every word counts. So, can't skimp on the craft side. whether it's getting your text tight and good and strong. If you're writing nonfiction, Bill, you can probably bump it up to more like 1,100, 1,200 words, okay? But you've got to, the nice thing about that word count is that it's going to force you to think about the illustrations, all right? And that's the beauty of the picture book, is that there is this interplay of text and art, and that one is not just sort of a nice little add-on for the other. It's the two things working together. They absolutely work together. And so your story will become different when you have the art, and that's exactly how it should be. Speaking of the art, you can't skimp on the art. The one thing you don't want to do is have your book, have somebody pick up your book and say, wow, this is just, wow. You know, to not be intrigued from the start, to not have a good cover, and you guys know all about covers, but then also not to have, you know, really skilled, beautiful illustrations throughout the book. If you skimp on the art, you're going to directly hurt your sales, and you're not going to have a good experience. And then, of course, all those indie publishing questions, which Victor, that's on the next slide for us, please. And for those of you who have indie published other sorts of books, this is no surprise, right? Are you going to e-publish? If so, in which format? They're all different. And you add art to the mix, and then you really get a headache. Are you going to do print on demand? Or are you going to print with a press? And so, you know, I would be very interested to know, Gretchen and Deb, how did you guys, which format did you choose, and what led you there? So Debbie first.
I chose, you know, offset printing because at the time that I was doing my picture books, the print on demand, they just weren't doing a good job with 4-color art.
Okay.
And I wanted the quality, and I worked with a friend who was a consultant to indie publishers, and she helped me find a really good press in Hong Kong that brought the cost down. I only did 2,000, but that was what I could manage, and that was what I did for my picture books, was printed 2,000. I did get them all sold, but I did not go for a reprint.
You know what though? I love so many things about that answer. A, you worked with a consultant. You picked somebody else's brain. Good for you. B, you valued the art. You knew that if you did print on demand, that you weren't going to have the results you wanted. And you know that art matters in an illustrated work. C, you had a budget. You stuck to it. Good for you. And, you know, so all of these things make sense. You use a consultant to find out who does a good job with this kind of printing. And it's that research that will pay dividends. Did you work with a book designer as well? Or did your illustrator do some of that design work for you?
No, my illustrator told me flatly that he just really didn't know anything about actually designing the pages. So I worked with a graphic designer, an indie graphic designer.
Good, good. So Gretchen, what was your experience? How did you approach it?
Well, I had a vision for the books, and I did also consult a consultant. And I was very fortunate that my illustrator, she could just draw what I had in my head. She was actually an art student at Northern Michigan University when we did our first book, and she worked with her art department there. And but we have continued to keep our books hardcover. We're not doing ebooks. We've looked at printing them on demand, but with our multicolored hardcovers, it's just, I can't find anyone who will replicate them to meet my quality. So I'm just keeping it easy and keeping them hardcover print books. The first and second book in the series are both in their second printing, their second runs.
Yay!
And you know, I mean, one of the things I love about children's books is that you always have a group of children growing into the books and a group of children growing out of the book. So you've got a constant market.
Smart lady. And you're right. That is, I mean, some of these books that we read as kids, there's a reason they're still out there, right? And so another, you know, you essentially same kind of answer. You consulted with someone, you were very particular about art, thank goodness. And the thing that each of these two have emphasized as well is, or at least that they've noted, and I'm going to emphasize, is that they wanted print books. And that is the other thing with children's illustrated works. Kids still like a book in their hands. So can you e-publish them? Sure. Have we got kids, you know, doing a lot more screen time these days than we wish because of distance learning school? Yes. But there still is really nothing that replaces that book in hands. It's good for kids who are learning to read, and it's wonderful for parents and other adults who want to read with kids, which we know enhances their language skills and is just good quality family time. So you've got to, again, factor all of these things in. And if you're not a book designer, how do you figure out which font you should be using in your kid's book? If you're not an illustrator or you're not a printer, you know, what about bleed? How big does that image have to be? And what is bleed? And it sounds horrible, right? So there are all these questions that people who are in that area know, just as you know about the topics you write about, and you have your own skills being a writer. So don't be afraid to you know, build a team, to defer to other people's judgment, to pick other people's brains, because that's how you'll get through this. All right, next slide, please. All right, these are a few more of those comments that I'm going to kind of breeze through right now so that we have plenty of time for Q&A. But again, look at these. If you revisit the slides, look at some of these comments and people telling you about the challenges that they face. And really a lot of it has to do with juggling a lot of things and maybe finding the right people to be your helping hands. Next slide, please. All right. So some of these we've already covered, this notion of having somebody help you edit your work before you even get to the stage of illustrations, etc. A big no-no in children's illustrated works is something that is too message driven, that is too didactic, that is too, let me tell you how it is, or you are going to learn a lesson kind of thing. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Read a lot of kids' books and you will easily yourself be able to discern which ones appeal to you and which ones don't. It's not that there can't be a message, there cannot be a lesson learned, but it's the way the writer presents it. Picture books are funny little creatures in the sense that when they are printed traditionally, they are always printed with pages in multiples of 4. And that's, you know, generally it's 32 pages. And those of you who have printed independently, you know that there's probably a good reason. 32 is a nice size for budgeting, you know, and if you ever want to get your picture book published traditionally and you want it to be a 40-pager, well, that's a nice multiple of 4, but boy, that sure does awful things to the profit and loss statement. And so, so just know that there is this animal that is a picture book, and it's generally 32 pages. Generally 28 of those have text and illustrations on them, because you have to have pages for title, copyright, back matter, etc. Now, does this mean yours has to be that if you're indie publishing? No. But do you want your book to look and feel like a picture book that is published traditionally? If you want it in a library, yeah. If you want it in a bookstore, probably. There are exceptions, but know that if you're going to make an exception, that you better have a good reason, because otherwise the last thing you want is for your book to be something that looks very unlike a children's book. It's not going to end up on the shelf with other children's books if it doesn't, you know, if it doesn't walk that walk. And again, I've already addressed educators and knowing what fits their needs, because that's a real nice place to be if you're writing nonfiction. All right, next slide. All right, so I have a couple of examples of interplay of text and art. I've already mentioned that with no other genre are you really going to have these issues of look and feel. Now, Gretchen mentioned that hers were chapter books. Same idea. Chapter books are not that 32 pages, but they still have a very distinct look and feel. They, you know, number of words on the page, number of pages in the chapter. Most of them will be run through some kind of computer program to assess reading level. So there are these funny little rules about picture books and other genres for kids. Spend some time on the internet looking into them. If you're thinking of a board book, look at board books and figure out what some of the parameters are. Now, the text has to include opportunities for illustration. That the cover there that you see, this is my newest book. It's actually coming out October 13. And I'm using this as an example. When I first submitted this manuscript, it was all about winter and loving winter, because I love winter and you guys are Yoopers, so you love winter, right? Maybe, I don't know, maybe you go to Arizona in the winter. But when I submitted this text, it had a lot of nature in it. It had a lot of weather in it. And the editor who bought it said to me, you know, I love this. It's beautiful, but we got to have a family in this. It's a picture book for kids, and the family has to do something. And so my manuscript became something very different, in the sense that every other page you're seeing a family in a snowball fight, or snowshoeing, ice fishing, skiing, making a snowman. So why do I bring this up? Just because what I needed to do is what you all need to do if you want to have a good illustrated work, and that is to provide good opportunities for illustration in your text. It doesn't mean you spell everything out. You know, she wore a red hat and she had a blue skirt on. But you've got to have enough happening in your book that every time that page turns, there is something fresh and new that your illustrator can illustrate. All right, next slide, please. This is from a manuscript that I just wrapped up, and this book will come out next fall. But I wanted to use it as an example of how you know, your text has to provide illustration opportunities, but it doesn't have to spell it out, as I just said. So that second bullet point, that's just a line that I had written in my manuscript. Chattering red squirrels race up and down the tree's trunk. They leap among the branches, snacking on seeds and cones. If the weather turns bad, the tree offers them protection. They snuggle deep into soft needles and curl their tails. And you can see where the editor has made some just regular editorial changes, you know, eliminated trees, and instead of offers them protection, just as the tree protects, much better. But it's that last line that I want to point out. They snuggle deep into soft needles, stop. She deleted the and curl their tails around themselves, and her note, of course, is exactly what it should have been. Aimee will show this. We don't have to say it. So when I am editing picture books, you know, you edit on the front end, you get it tight, you try to provide opportunities for illustration, but invariably, every time I've done an illustrated work, I get it back after the art comes back, and we go back and edit a little bit more, because you'll see that there are words and phrases that you can delete. You don't need them. They're right there in the illustrations. And that's that marriage of text and art that is so fabulous, that it's why those two work together, and why you end up with a truly collaborative work, as opposed to the story that you originally wrote, which was probably good, but it's so much better now. That's the way I view picture books. All right, next slide, please. I'm just continuing to beat this drum that picture books are visual, and so you've got to have good art, and you've got to edit the text to accommodate for that art. It should all flow. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this one is called, this is a Sam and the 7-Pound Perch. This was an indie published book by Paul Hoffman and Nick Patton. And I bring these two guys up because I worked with them as a lawyer. This is when I was still advising clients who were doing indie publishing. They came to me for a contract, but they were just so fun. They were fun to work with, for me to work with, and they also had a lot of fun working together. Now, just as Gretchen said, she had interviewed a number of artists and illustrators. Paul will tell you that he interviewed 4 different illustrators before he chose Nick. And he chose Nick not just for his illustration style, but because he really enjoyed him, because Nick had experience with picture books, and Nick also knew other people in the picture book world who could help them with the process, all of which were very important to Paul because he was a newbie. And they ended up creating this book that is just a hoot. Next slide, please, Victor. So here are a couple of their comments. Paul's is the second one. When selecting an illustrator, choose someone who can bring the words to life, tell the story through the illustrations, as well as the words on the page. Chemistry is important. And Gretchen, you very much said this when you indicated that the illustrator you chose, she could recreate what you saw in your mind. And that's, you want to have that kind of fit. Darcy Patterson, who is the person who made the previous comment, Darcy, of course, is a real proponent of you've got to have good art, but she also relates in a certain blog piece that she wrote, and it's on your resource list, how she actually delayed a series. She made the choice to delay it because the illustrator of the first couple books in this series had a health issue and wasn't going to be available for a while, but it was so important to Darcy that she keep the same look in the series and that she have that relationship that she just decided to hold off on publishing more and wait for that illustrator. It's a very strong relationship kind of thing that will aid you in your self-publishing endeavor if you've got a good partner. Next slide, please. This is Paul talking about how he interviewed 4 illustrators. Next slide. And then just some tips for working with an illustrator. Do your homework. You've already heard that from 2 of your colleagues here in UPPAA. Make contact with them, interview them, look at their portfolio. Ideally, find somebody who's already worked on a picture book. Have a spec sheet. Set clear expectations. Even if you enjoy this person immensely, you still have to treat this like the business relationship that it is, because things can go wrong. Invariably, things go wrong. And so you've got to also have the backing of a strong business understanding for when something goes wrong. Next slide, Victor. These are the sorts of things that you should know yourself before you contact an illustrator. Be able to tell that illustrator when you're interviewing him or her the name and the subject matter of the book, the genre, what kind of illustrations do you need. The illustrations that Gretchen needs for a chapter book series, much different than the illustrations that Deb would want for a picture book, and as far as number of illustrations and type of illustrations. You'll need to tell your illustrator, your potential illustrator, what your budget is and what arrangements you're going to make with them. Deb and Gretchen, do you allow your illustrators to keep copyright? Do you license rights, or do you have them work for you on a work for hire basis?
I used a work for hire where I would own the art, but my illustrator had the right to use it for self-promotion, so that he could say, here are examples of a cover that I did or a picture book that I did. Good. So he had that right, but I chose work for hire because, oh, the bookkeeping with royalties is just horrendous, and I just wanted to say, okay, here's your money, you're done, I don't have to worry about that anymore.
How about you, Gretchen?
My illustrator is actually a partner in my publishing company. So the publishing company, Preston Hill Press, owns the copyright, and we also sell the artwork off our website. So
Good.
we continue to work together.
Love that. Two really good examples of how you can handle this. Work for hire is the cleanest. You're absolutely right, Deb, from the standpoint of not having to track royalties, and also knowing that if you own the art, and that's what work for hire is, you purchase the copyright to the art. You can do whatever you want. You can make napkins, you can make a board game, you can, the art is yours. And you can do just what you have done, which is allow your illustrator to also use the art for certain discrete purposes. Gretchen, your approach is great as well. You have a press, you have a company, and the company owns the copyright, and that gives you all kinds of opportunities as well. So the main thing you guys have to know is copyright is going to be your stock and trade. And so how you handle it is not that there's a right way or a wrong way, but you need to know what your plans are, and you'll have to convey this to the artist that you're hoping to hire to do the illustrations. Timelines, deadlines, knowing how revisions will be handled, payment, when payment will be made, installments, a number of copies of the book that you're going to give to the illustrator. These are all things that you are going to want to think about in advance, and you're certainly going to need to cover in a contract, a written contract with your illustrator. Next slide, please. Be a good communicator. Whether it's work for hire or not, whether you're ultimately going to own it, whether you have unlimited revisions you can request, you still want to, of course, develop that relationship, communicate clearly, space out your payments. Things can go wrong. Maybe the artist does not perform the way you were hoping he or she would, and you need to withhold final payment until you get delivery of the art in the manner in which you've requested it. Sometimes you have to have a kill fee. If the artist just really isn't working out, then it's like, okay, we're done. That you don't own any of this. You're taking this amount of money to just go away. So these are all things that you need to think about in advance. And then, of course, how knowledgeable is your illustrator about those tech issues? Does your illustrator know that 300 DPI is the minimum image resolution for illustrated works for printers? And if they know that, do they also understand bleed? That is the image going to be contained within the page with a border around it, or do you want that image to flow from one end to the other of the page, in which case that's going to affect the size of the illustrations that are being created, and the DPI. You have to understand about gutters and picture books. And I know we've got the slides up, but you see me in my little screen here. The gutter is this where the book is stitched together in the middle. And how much of the illustration is that going to take up if you've got a full page spread? So your illustrator needs to have some knowledge of this, or if they don't, your printer does, or somebody you consult with. Deb, I think you're the one who said you used a graphic designer then to help, okay? So, because you want those illustrations that you paid a lot of money for to display as well as they can on the page. All right, let me quick check and see where we are slide-wise and whether we should stop here. Let's go ahead and just zip through a few more slides, Victor, and then I think we'll take questions, okay?
All right, hold on just a second. I've got myself confused.
I think I confused you. It's okay.
Can you see it now?
I cannot.
Okay, I'll try it again.
You know what? Let's not worry about it.
Okay.
It's just fine, because again, you're going to post the PowerPoint slides for people to access on their own, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so now what I want is I want a big view of all of you. I want you, let's see, I've got you lined up on a side, but I want to be able to see everybody at once. Gallery view. There we go. Yay. Okay, good. So couple more points that I want to cover, and then let's just open it up. Deb mentioned SCBWI. If you're going to write for kids, that's an organization you want to become familiar with, okay? SCBWI stands for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Now, there is a resource list that I provided to Victor. And Victor, I don't know, are you going to post that or email that? How's that going to get out to people?
We'll have one page with your PowerPoint and the resource list and YouTube. So they only need one, they're only going to need one link.
Good, because I thank you very much. I wanted to put that list, that resource list together for you so that you had live links that you could just click to, and SCBWI is on there. So Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's a national organization, and then it has regional chapters. Michigan has an excellent regional chapter, really active. And you guys, the Michigan group does wonderful events, both online and in person when we're allowed to do that again. And they bring in, you know, editors and agents and people who are quite skilled and just do great presentations. What they have that I wasn't aware of until I did my homework for this presentation is that Michigan also has a team of people who help with regard to indie publishing. And the Michigan contact, her name is Melissa Bailey. Her email is on that resource list, and she encourages you guys to reach out to her. So it's a membership organization. They have wonderful online resources at the national level on publishing, sample contracts, all kinds of ways to market your book. They do, you know, things on a monthly basis. Some are free to members, some you pay $25, but it's a great organization. Okay, enough of the commercial. But look for that link on your resource page that talks about the independent publishing team of the Michigan SCBWI chapter. One of the other things that SCBWI does is that each year they have a number of grants and awards, but each year they have an award, they call it the Spark Award. And that is an award for self-published children's books. And why do I bring that up? A, it's an award you could apply for if you were a member of the SCBWI. And B, it's a great way to go on their website and look at past winners and see what they think are representative, good, self-published kids' books. Now, one of the ones that you will see if you go on their website is this one called Beautiful Hands. Okay, so this was a Spark Award winner a few years ago. And the author is Brett Baumgarten, but the illustrator was Catherine Otoshi, who has now set up her own press, KO Kids. That should also be a link on your resource list. And so if you want to see an example of just a beautiful self-published book, you know, this was a book that Brett wrote, sad story, he was dying and he wanted something for his kids. And he partnered with Catherine, and it's very cool. And it's actually quite different in the way the font flows and the illustrations are. Lots of white space, very simple text. But this one, as I said, was a Spark Award winner. And you can go on the website and get a sense of other books that have received the award, and you know, some really kind of fun ideas for how you might approach your own book. What else was I going to tell you on the slides? I have my slides here too, Victor. I'm just taking a quick peek. Oh, and one other one I want to show you is Celeste Tilson's book, the Miss McNair book that I had the cover displayed earlier for. Celeste and I went back and forth with some emails about this one. I love this book. It's a rhyming picture book, which a lot of people say don't do, and that's because so many people do rhyme horribly. This is a really good rhyming picture book. I mean, the meter, the rhyme, it's spot on. But in addition to that, when Celeste wrote it and hired an artist, she decided to make it a coloring book.
Wow.
So it's a great story, but it's all illustrated in black and white. So it's a coloring book too. How smart is that? And so she, we talked a little bit about the publishing and how she was going to do it. And she decided not to e-publish it, that she definitely wanted it to be a book in hand. And then I'm not even sure when in the process came to the realization that this could be a coloring book and be dual duty. All right, and let me just see if there were any others I wanted to mention. No, let's do questions right now. So Victor, if you will, everybody's unmuted, or I guess you guys can unmute.
I'm unmuting everybody right now, so.
He's going to let you speak.
I'll just butt in here and put in a plug for children's audiobooks, which are a very cheap supplement to your printed book. If you think about it, a typical audiobook recording artist will charge, say, $100 per finished hour of the book. And well, your book only takes 10 minutes to read. You'll only end up paying about $25 for the audios. So it's a very cheap way to expand your market.
Great point. And I'm an audiobook addict, so I'm surprised I didn't think to mention that myself. Another reason though why indie publishing may be the way you want to go, because if you publish with a publisher, a traditional publisher, and you sign an all rights deal, you don't get to make that call about the audiobook.
For
whether
sure.
It's who does it, and you get a small percentage, of course, of that pie as opposed to all sales.
Aimee, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you hire an artist and you buy their works, you say you have the copyright. I know how to get a copyright written, but how do I get their copyright? I know I shouldn't be asking an attorney this, but do I have to go to a lawyer to get their copyrights?
No. Okay. Yes and no. I shouldn't just say no right out of the gate. What you need if you're going to hire an artist on a work for hire basis, so that you own the copyright. Basically what Deb did, say, I went, this is what you're going to do. I will pay you. You will have no rights after that. You will get no payment after that. And a lot of people will do that. Many of us will do written work for hire stuff, right? If it's write something for a magazine, work for hire, who cares? It pays the bills. It's not your passion in life. However, the one thing you need to know if you're going to arrange a work for hire arrangement with your illustrators, that must be in writing, okay? You have to have a written contract. Does it need to be horribly long and sexy? No. And in fact, there are a lot of good books at the library and online that will provide you with templates. But the important thing is that you do have it in writing and your artist does sign it, okay? So there's no question. As far as registering the copyright, once you own the copyright, you submit the images just as you would your written work to the Copyright Office. You do not need an attorney for that. And so you can submit the art and get the art copyrighted, and then of course your picture book ultimately would also be copyrighted. There'd be a separate copyright because it's not images. You get the copyright in the images, and then you get the copyright in the finished book. So 2 different applications. It can all be done online. And there are actually some excellent tutorials on the copyright.gov website that will walk you through registering your copyright.
Do you have to describe each picture?
No, you can, in fact, a lot of people when they submit art that is in a series, whether it's for a book or whether it's like a photographer did a trip, and these are all his photos of Italy, you can submit them as a group. And it's a different box that you check on the form, but you just identify the group, and one short description than for the entire group of pictures works.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have one for you, Aimee. Thank you for your plug for getting me involved. How much would one expect or to the cost of what an undertaking to do X number of copies or hire an artist or whatever? Is it 10,000? Is it 5,000?
It's so hard to say. It depends on who you use. It depends on the format you're publishing in. I don't know if either Deb or Gretchen wants to talk turkey with regard to dollars. I think we might have lost Gretchen. Did we lose her?
Yeah, I think so. I'll be upfront with you. I spent about 10 grand on each of my picture books.
And that's
a pretty good average.
Yeah.
I saved a little on my Illustrator because mine was also a student at a university at the time and did the first picture book for his senior project. So I got by cheaply on that because he wasn't well known yet. I was proud to help him launch his career. When we did the second one, I gave him the same amount of cash, but I also gave him 2 cartons of books that he could sell and keep.
Wonderful.
So
I think that's pretty much a ballpark. Yeah. Here's some, and I'm not trying to be cagey about this. It's just that it really is that variable, Bill, depending on who you use, whether that's the printer or the designer or the artist. And this strategy about finding somebody who's a little new and hungry is a good one. In fact, I just had a couple books come out with Albert Whitman last month, and that is the approach that publisher took. Not only are these 2 books, so there's this one,
Oh, that's
and
pretty.
then there's not only are these 2 books with artists who were just dipping their toes in the waters of picture book making, but these are also both graphic artists. So they do their art on computer. Now, this is the first time, you know, and so it's faster, it's cheaper. I had never had a book done this way, but I got to tell you, I'm just not disappointed. The art is beautiful. So, but, you know, so if you choose somebody whose style is easier for them to produce, quicker for them to produce, maybe they're a little hungry. Darcy Pattison, and her information is on your resource list, and I've mentioned her. She uses international artists all the time. And she tends to use a website called Behance, B-E-H-A-N-C-E, behance.net, to find artists all over the world. And she says that she can find somebody who's quite talented and will work for more cheaply than perhaps a US artist would. SCBWI also has a list of artists, and that would be another reason to join that organization, is to tap into the resources of their artist directory, and that will allow you to find people.
Thank you very much.
One of the things I did want to show you with regard to art is just so that you think differently. I've shown you now these 2 books and the fact that they are very graphic, right? I showed you some of the dragonflies, and then this one is a desert book. And so, you know, that's a type of art that I had not worked with before, but with the right story, it's just the right fit. We talked about Ms. McNair and how maybe you just don't do color and you do something creative like make it a picture book. I mean, a coloring book. Beautiful hands. If you look at this art, it's all fingerprint art throughout the entire book. And what the artist did is she recruited members of the author's family and her own family, and did a lot of fingerprint art. This is a book of mine that came out this past March, and the artist, she's this lovely little woman from British Columbia. All of her art is cut paper. So she
Wow.
cuts out paper and creates dioramas and then photographs them. The very first book I did, the woman who illustrated it was a scratchboard artist. So the art, you know, spend some time in bookstores and libraries and just look at all the different types of art as well. It doesn't have to be watercolor. I have books where the illustrators use watercolor and they're beautiful, but it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to be realistic. And there are so many different mediums. Any other questions?
We haven't talked much about going through an agent and getting someone to do all of this nitty-gritty publishing stuff for you.
Oh, you mean the lazy woman's way out, right? You know,
one who's getting older.
I mean, as I said at the top of this this hour, I'm in awe of you guys that you take on self-publishing. I could not manage it. To me, there are too many moving parts. I don't trust my own sense of design. I would literally have to hire a team. So Bill, that $10,000 budget would be like, you know. I chose the other route. And so I have, when I first started writing picture books, I was submitting directly to editors. There are fewer and fewer presses these days that will take direct submissions from authors, but there are still some. In fact, if I think about it, I can email Victor after this. A friend of mine just sent me a list of 10 presses that are currently accepting unsolicited or unagented manuscripts. And that is how I got my first 3 books published, was just by submitting directly to editors. With regard to the agent thing, it's so hard to find an agent. It is so hard, and I just got lucky. I was sitting at a conference talking with the woman next to me, and she said that she had an agent and that her agent only took referrals from people she already represented. And this kind woman said, I'll refer you. And it just worked out to be a very good fit. I just got lucky. I contacted the agent said yes, and she has sold now. I mean, next year when my next 2 books come out, I'll have 10 books total. So I sold 3 on my own. She sold 7 for me. So, and in a much shorter period of time. Agents can reach people we can't reach. And then what happens from my perspective, of course, is that I only really worry about the text. You know, I get it as good as I can get it. I work with the editor at the publishing house. They have a copy editor who does the copy editing. When it comes back with the art, we'll do a little more tweaking. But it's hands off from the standpoint of once I do the words, that's it. I do usually get in advance too. I mean, on all of my picture books, I have gotten in advance, and so that's nice.
Aimee, can you talk a little bit about some of the nonfiction areas that are hot these days? We're talking American history or science? What kind of things?
Science, particularly for elementary school, okay? And it's, a lot of the books that I've done have been natural science. So the 2 that just came out, of course, Dragonflies, and then Tinaha, the desert one, those are natural science. The 2 that I just finished the manuscripts on that are now with the illustrator that'll come out next year are Coral Reefs and The Second Life of Trees. So what happens when a tree falls and animals take over and insects take over and burrow and eat, and mushrooms and mold. And so science, you know, and I geek out about that stuff anyway, so I love writing it. Picture book biographies are still hot too. I've got a book coming out in March that will be my 3rd picture book biography. And those, you know, for me, I find somebody who impresses me, and I will read an obituary twice. That's how I found subjects. I read an obituary of some amazing woman and say, oh my God, kids have to know about her. And then the trick, of course, is to write it in a way that makes them care about her as much as I do. So, so there is some history, but science is really it. And when everything I read tells me too that although I have sold a number of natural science books, that really what they're craving, what teachers are craving and what publishers are craving are physics, math, geology, ecology, you know, the science of water, that kind of stuff.
Great, thanks. That's some great ideas there.
So Aimee, I have a follow-up, maybe a couple. Your winter book, they asked you to accommodate so that it would have a family for the activity. Then I'm wondering, it didn't seem as though in your desert book or in your dragonfly book that you had people in it. Is that
Right. Right, completely different. So the winter book, I was selling as narrative nonfiction. That's how I was pitching it, right?
Okay.
And they wanted really to fictionalize it more and have this family. And so that was the publisher's choice. It's funny too, because I had written it for our Northwoods, you know, Michigan and Minnesota, and the publishers out in Seattle, and they're like, you know, can we make it Pacific Northwest? So yeah, sure, whatever, you know. So I still had to do the research to make sure that the animals I was plugging in were true to that region. But
Wow.
So that's what happened with that one, is they had a view of it, and I was fine with that. Deb, you mentioned some people feel like they lose control of their books. I didn't feel like I was losing control. I felt like that was really nice guidance. Now the two I showed you, the dragonfly one and the desert one, here's the interesting thing about those. Again, I wrote them as narrative nonfiction. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but when the editor bought these, she said, okay, this is great. We love the narrative. And the narrative is in somewhat larger font.
Right.
And it's page by page. But then she said, and you know what? We need a bunch of fact boxes.
Yeah.
So it ended up being really fun. It's this layered text where you can read the narrative to kids that are maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, but then your 7, 8, 9-year-olds can look at those fact boxes and really drill down and maybe even use them for report writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that combination. That leads me to one of my other questions, which is I have a concept for a book right now, which in my head I'm calling a picture book. The beginning of it feels quite like a picture book, but then it follows up with very, very short biographies on people who engage in activities which are represented in the child's activities throughout the picture book portion.
Oh, I like that.
You like it?
Yes.
I don't know what to do. I don't know, I don't know what the, you know, I used to be an elementary school teacher, so I like the idea, like, okay, the kids could, you know, maybe research more or write something on the biography pieces. What grade do you typically write for?
You know, it's funny. I always think I'm writing for 2nd and 3rd grade, and then the publisher usually says it's for a lower, like, like they'll say 6 to 8. I'll be saying, but I'll tell you 2 things. I know so many successful children's writers who were elementary school teachers. You know, you get it. You get it. You know this stuff inside and out. And the second thing is that when Victor asked about nonfiction, the thing that publishers just love with nonfiction too is back matter. So you're talking about at the end having short biographies of people who did things that are representative of what's in the text. That's back matter, and it's that juicy stuff that teachers love. And so it allows a publisher to really sell that book into the school market as well as you know, through booksellers. And you've got, when I mentioned at the very beginning about how there are rules about picture books, but there are times that you can break those rules. That's an example. There are some wonderful illustrated picture books out there. That's redundant. Illustrated works for kids that are out there that are running 45, 50, 60 pages long, and they are intended for a little older audience, and exactly the kind of thing you're describing. Lots of great information. They're usually highly visual with graphics or with photos. So, you know, you break the rules with something like that, but you can end up with something really special.
Yeah, as it is, the biographies are quite brief and written low enough that I would hope that it could be almost like a first research project, like in 2nd grade.
Yeah.
So they're not terribly extensive. They're quite brief, but that was the grade I had in mind.
Oh, that's so cool. Yay.
Thank you.
All right, well, are your tummies rumbling? Did you guys eat before, or are you still waiting to go eat? I really appreciate the turnout. Thank you so much. And as I said, look for the resource list, because if you can link to that, then all the links within it are electronic. You should be able to just click, and there are blog posts. There's a podcast that's worth listening to. There's the information about SCBWI. Trying to think of what else I put on it. Oh, the very last thing, a woman who I don't know, but I included her email address at the end of the resource list. She contacted me and said that she is setting up, excuse me, an online kind of a market for self-published children's books. And they were trying to really, you pay a commission to them, but they stock your book and they have the online presence. I can't vouch for her, but she described it better in the email, and that's on the resource list too, if you're looking for a potential marketing opportunity for your books.
Thank you, Aimee. You've been very generous with your time, and thank you everyone who threw out some great questions. And this is going to be one of our best ones for the archive, or as Gretchen calls it, the library of stuff.
Well, Victor, thank you for everything you did to set this up, and just for the invitation to meet with everyone. So you guys have a great rest of your week.
Thanks again, Aimee.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.